Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keith Anderson, and as the president of the Alabama Bandmasters Association, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2026 Alabama All-State Festival. Please take a moment at this time to silence any electronic devices that might be a distraction to our performers or those sitting around you during the performance. And at this time, allow me to introduce our All-State White Band and to introduce their conductor, our band host, Ms. Heather Henson.
Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon. Our clinician this weekend for All-State has been Mr. Loris Schissel. He has been the head musicologist at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. for 40 years. You can read all about him in your digital program because it would take me a long time to read all that. I'd rather speak about what we've enjoyed this weekend. This man is a wealth of knowledge, as you can imagine, about great musicianship, but also I'm fairly certain he knows every detail about all wind band literature ever written and the lives of their composers. He started his career with Aaron Copland, which a lot of you will recognize that name, hopefully, and then Lenny, as in Leonard Bernstein. So you can imagine the stories he can tell, and I could listen all day long, and I got to do that this weekend. It was such a joy, and all of these students to hear his knowledge. Listening to them rehearse every day makes me want to play every instrument, I told them. I sit over here by the bassoons, but I normally play clarinet. It's been just a joy to hear them and the passion that they have for music. So will you please help me welcome the 2026 Alabama All-State White Band and their conductor, Mr. Loris Schissel.
Since you don't have program notes on these numbers, I'll give you just a little program note on each piece we're going to play for the concert. We're going to open with what we call a concert march. It's not a march to be meant to be marched down the street or out on the football field. It's sort of an indoor march, something you might hear at graduation, more of a grand march style. Its composer was a Texas composer and Arkansas composer, both Texas and Arkansas, named James Clifton Williams. And he wrote this march for a fraternity, actually, that I was in when I was in college. And he used all of our fraternity songs in there. So a lot of them you'll hear in the trombones and the euphonium baritone section over there, because they kind of fit the men's chorus sort of sound of these fraternity songs. But the fraternity's name was Phi Mu Alpha Symphonia. And the march is called the Sinfonians. This is by Clifton Williams. This is by a composer named Václav Nelibel. And he was a Czech composer. He grew up in Czechoslovakia during the Russian occupation after World War II. And he was one of those people that escaped, you know, riding on the underneath of a box car going from Czechoslovakia into Germany and then over here to the United States. He was a composer over there, a very famous composer, but when he got here to the United States, no one knew anything about him. And so he saw this huge amount of bands all over the United States, and he said, I'm going to start writing for them, because if I write music for them, they'll actually play it. And so he was a composer that was a big deal when I was their age. And actually, I played this piece as a tuba player way back in 1982 when I played in the Iowa All-State Band. But we're going to play it now. And it's a little on the modern side, but not overly modern. But what it is if you think of it, it's a conversation between the woodwind section, that'd be the clarinets and the flutes and all those woodwind instruments, and the brass instruments answer back. And in between there, the percussion come in, and they have their say a little bit a part of the time too. So it's kind of a conversation between the three families of the concert band: the woodwinds, the brass, and the percussion. So here it is. It's by Václav Nelibel, and it's called Festivo. I grew up in an era where we didn't have as much concert band music written specifically for the concert band, that they do nowadays. You swing a cat and you'll hit a composer of concert music at some point, at least for concert band. And in my era growing up, we had a mixture of playing marches, by John Philip Sousa and Carl King, these great marches, the core of what we call the concert band or the marching band. We had original pieces that were written for us, like that Václav Nelly Bell piece, but we also borrowed heavily from the orchestra music and from organ music. I mean, what is a concert band but a living, breathing pipe organ? If you go look at your organ in the church, most of those buttons you see on the side are the instruments of the concert band on the side. They pull them out and it makes it sound like a concert band. Well, this is a living, breathing pipe organ you see behind me here. But we also transcribed and made arrangements of music for voice and piano for concert band. And this is one we're going to play now. It's written by a German-Austrian composer named Richard Strauss. Some of you may remember him as the composer of that fanfare, and the timpani comes in, the pipe organ. I think it's in that movie, the 2001 or something like that, that they used for that film. But he wrote lots of different kinds of music for orchestra. He wrote band music, and he wrote a lot of songs because his wife was a famous opera singer. And this is one of the songs that he wrote for his wife. And it's called Aller Seelen, and in German, that means All Souls Day, which is the day that occurs after, if I'm right, after All Saints Day, and it's for the people who have gone on. And the song is very beautiful, and actually sounds wonderful with a concert band, as much wonderful with a concert band as it does with a piano and a voice. And if you listen to this carefully, it starts out very softly and sort of in the background, and it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds, and sort of like as we pass on to the other world, it relaxes and it just fades away in a very positive mood. And we'd like to play it for you now. It's by Richard Strauss. It's called Aller Seelen, which translates to All Souls Day. As far as I'm concerned, it's not a band concert if you don't play one march. And as far as I'm concerned, it better be one by John Philip Sousa. You know, I was explaining to the band, during his lifetime, Sousa was born in 1854, died in 1932. He was the most famous musician in the world. The New York Times said his face was more recognizable to most American citizens than the President of the United States. He was a musical superstar, but he had to do it the old-fashioned way. He had to do it in person. There was no way of transmitting. Recordings were just getting started that way. During his lifetime, his concert band toured the United States, Europe, and in 1911 and 1912 made a tour around the world. And between 1892 and 1932, when he passed away, his concert band played 19,746 concerts. And that was back in the old days where you had to do it by train. And so you'd play an afternoon concert here in Mobile, and then go up to another town, play an evening concert, sleep in a hotel. 6 a.m. the train would come, pick you up, you go to the next town. 2 concerts a day, 7 days a week, about 11 months out of the year for 39 years he did that. He was more famous in his lifetime as a conductor than he was as a composer. Now we think of him as a composer, but he was America's first musical superstar. And, you know, by the time America was going into World War I, Sousa was 67 years old. He was a millionaire many, many, many times over. And he decided to enlist in the United States Navy at 67 to literally train thousands of band musicians out at the Great Lakes Naval Training Center just outside of Chicago. And he had a 300-piece marching band. And he marched every single step of every parade that that band played over 2 years, raising money for the war effort. During World War II, we called them victory bonds. Back in World War I, they were called the Liberty Loan. And his band raised over $24 million for the war effort. And Sousa did this for the munificent sum of $1 a month. That was his Navy salary. And at the Library of Congress, we have his first check as later Lieutenant Commander John Philip Sousa for $1 from the U.S. government. And he wrote a little poem on the bottom of that check, and it went something like this. I joined the reserves on the last day of May. I gave up my band and 1,000 a day. $1 a month is my government pay. My God, how the money rolls in. So, during 1918, Sousa wrote 9 of his best marches, and I think it was just the war effort, being with all these young boys at Great Lakes with these wonderful musicians, marching all those parades. He wrote some of his best marches he ever wrote, and we're going to play one of them for you now. And it was written for the 4th Liberty Loan Rally. There was 4 of them during the war. And he wrote this march special for it, and since it's got liberty in the title, what famous American object has the word liberty in it? It's probably the most famous bell. Anyone know? The Liberty Bell. So he wrote a special part for the bell on the Liberty Loan March, and we're going to play it for you now. One of his great marches, one of 136 marches that he wrote, and we're going to play it for you now. It's called the Liberty Loan.
Testing. There we go. That was wonderful. I'm going to talk just briefly for a minute and then present Loris, like he likes to be called, with a plaque. What a great celebration of music and music history you've given us. I want to point something out. He's not super emotional, but I am a little bit. It's amazing what community band brings community to you. That in 3 days, a man I've never known can bring me to tears with himself and with the band. But I know that that first song was your fraternity. I know that the second song was your first All-State band. I know the third song was a celebration of your loved ones. I know that the last song was a celebration of your country and your service. And the last one, I don't know, but it's called Celebration. So I'm going to think of it as a celebration of you. You are a wonderful man. So we have a plaque for you, presented to Loris John Schissel. I've worked hard on that, y'all. It's hard. By the Alabama Bandmasters Association, appreciation of your outstanding service as guest conductor and clinician of All-State White Band, April 16th through 18th, 2026, and a bunch of other words. But will you help me celebrate your clinician right now? Great.
Well, I'll tell you a pinch about the last number we're going to play. It's called Celebration. It's from a suite, which is just a couple of pieces of music put together by a composer that just go nice together. Nothing any fancy business about it. It's from a piece called Symphonic Songs for Band. And it was written by a wonderful American composer and arranger named Robert Russell Bennett. Now, for most people, that name doesn't register anything. But how many here have seen the musical South Pacific? How many people have watched the movie version or seen the musical The Sound of Music? Carousel, all of those wonderful musicals, Brigadoon, My Fair Lady, all those. When you listen to those musicals, all that orchestral music you hear in the background is arranged by Robert Russell Bennett. He's called the father of the American Broadway sound. And he did literally hundreds and hundreds of musicals throughout his career, all the way up into the 1980s. But when you hear a musical or you hear the way it sounds when you go to hear a musical, he really invented that sound. That's the Robert Russell Bennett sound. And we're going to play a piece that he wrote. It's a little bit autobiographical. He grew up in Kansas City. He was a professional quality baseball player, but he got polio, so that put that out of commission. So he went into music and went to New York and started doing these arrangements. And he played the baritone, or the euphonium was his instrument. He just, after doing a bunch of musicals, he said, I like to just sit down and write a nice piece of concert band music. It sort of clears the palate. And so this is one of those pieces that he wrote. And we're going to play it. Like I said, it's sort of autobiographical. Is that it's the kind of the 4th of July celebration there in Kansas City. So you've got things like mule races and the parade and the local town band that isn't necessarily the world's best band. And they play quite a few clinkers when they play, but they play with great enthusiasm. And so you'll hear some of that in this piece. And it's just fun. It's good music and it's fun. And my philosophy is, if you play a band concert, you come to a band concert to have a little fun. And this one, I hope you'll find that way. And before I play this last number, I just want to thank all of those folks, 161, I think of them, who have made this trip down here from Virginia a real pleasure. And they've worked so hard and been so wonderful. Courteous, studious, attentive, everything, and good to their colleagues. And you know, it's easy to get sort of depressed. You turn on the news and everyone's talking about everything going to pot and what's wrong with America. I'd say, if you hear someone say what's wrong with America, I'd say, come down to Alabama. I'll give you 161 reasons about what's great about America. And I wouldn't be courteous if I didn't thank all of you, mom and dads out there, band directors, grandpas, grandmas, aunts and uncles, all those people that make it possible for these kids to do all this stuff in band and all that stuff. Thank you, mom and dad, grandpa, grandma, for sharing your kids with me this weekend.
Thank you.